Hey, welcome back to our Friday edition of weekly sermon, video, podcast, whatever it is. We've been a little bit all over the place this week, and we're going to continue that fine tradition.
Just to really throw you off.
Just to see what we can do. One of the things I think about around Advent and around the God coming into the world, one way to characterize, I've heard characterized before, is that Jesus coming is God's rescue plan for creation. And that's something, again, like you're working on at Huntersville through Advent, talking about how this is part of God's plan all along. And it gets me to think about rescue, how we save, how we think of fixing wrongs. And I think about what God did, and one question I have when I think about the whole Jesus experience, born in that, nowhere place to nowhere people, is that's your plan?
Yeah.
Right? Hey, so let me ask you, if you had a plan to rescue humanity, what would it look like?
Well, first it reminds me of a story where Jesus is getting ready to leave heaven and the angels are gathered and Jesus says, hey, I'm going to go to earth. I'm going to take on the form of a baby. I'm going to live among these humans. I'm going to teach them. I'm going to heal them. I'm going to do all sorts. And then I'm going to die, and then I'll be raised again. And that's the plan for my life. And the angels look at one another like, Jesus, are you sure? So that story fits into that.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about saving things, we think of, one interesting things about our culture is this obsession with superheroes.
Yeah. The superhero is going to come onto the scene. We're all going to, celebrate this wonderful superhero's presence. We're going to go.
What
our Savior's here.
And what do all those superheroes have in common? They all have extraordinary abilities. Mm-hmm. Some of them can fly. Some of them can lift cars. Some of them are bulletproof. Some of them are super fast. But they have abilities that are far beyond what any human being would have. Mm-hmm. They're extraordinary.
And Jesus steps onto the stage of human history and is entirely ordinary. And he's born into an ordinary existence. He's born into a regular family, probably not unlike mine and yours. And he walks the earth, and yes, he has the capacity he is God and human at the same time, but he always likens the healing he does to faith.
Well, and he does, but before we get to that, I want to think about that idea of how we tell stories of our heroes.
Yeah.
The other narrative that's often out there in our movies are not just, if it's not a superhero, it's at least extraordinary people who have extraordinary abilities to inflict violence, vengeance, wrath. They can bring righteous retribution to bear on the enemy. And I grew up with those, and I think you did too with, Rambo was a big deal, right? Everybody wanted, you had Rambo was like this rough, tough, super person who was special forces, and now we have lots of movies about special agents.
The Rock and all these guys.
And they have that, again, and so much of the hurt of the world, the way that the hurt of the world is taken on is through violence. It's through, I'm going to kick your rear end. Mm-hmm. I'm going to kill anybody who opposes me. And, again, Sylvester Stallone made a living on that. So did Chuck Norris, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. All these. It's all about winning in the end. But the way you get to the win is you kill all those people who oppose you, and that's how we think about how things should work. We often have a calculus in our mind that there are winners and losers, and you really want to be the winner. And how are you a winner? Well,
we'll forget a seminary professor who we were in some similar conversation one day, and he asked us all in class. He said, "How did Jesus defeat sin, evil, darkness?" And we all kind of pondered for a moment and looked, and of course, we're struggling for a right answer. And he said, he soaked it up. He He didn't fight it from the standpoint of, I'm going to flash you with a righteous anger and defeat you and kill you. He took the brunt of human anger, of human brokenness,
rejection,
and
violence.
He took it upon himself. And of course, he died through it. And then he was raised to new life, and he never hurt anybody in the process.
It's pretty remarkable because when you think about the context that Jesus comes out of, we think of our world as being bad sometimes, and there are problems with our world. But the ancient world was, life had no value if you were a slave, if you were a woman, if you weren't born into the right class at the right time. Kings, rulers, the upper crust, they didn't even, they had absolute power. And the people of Israel spend much of their existence in either slavery to the Egyptians or in subjugation to an empire, whether it be the Babylonian Empire, whether it be the Assyrian Empire, whether it be the Greek Empire, or whether it be the Roman Empire. They are always, there's a brief period of time with David and Solomon where they have some level of autonomy on the world stage. But it's a brief period of time. And so the power dynamic in the ancient world is absolutely brutal. I mean, I can't even imagine, children could just be taken from their parents and sold. Nobody had any rights except for those at the very, very top. Most people existed in a life of terror and misery. And yet, out of that arises the faith of Israel that says things look different through who God really is. And that's part of what, so when Jesus shows up and takes on the oppression and the domination of empire and systems without violence,
because
it's
Jesus
remarkable.
was dealing with people who wanted to fight. He was dealing with these zealots who wanted to take up the sword. And when Jesus says, those who live by the sword die by the sword.
The best way to accomplish our means is to fight, and to carry out acts of violence, to throw off the yoke of oppression, to restore the righteous kingdom of God, just like when David was on the throne. That was a big part of the makeup of what Jesus stepped into. And people on his own team felt that way. Hey, James and John were known as the sons of thunder, not because they liked to go out during lightning storms. They wanted to bring the pain. And it's a remarkable thing that God is making a way that is contrary to how we would solve problems. And it begins a long time ago. This is from the book of the prophet Isaiah. This is probably written during the time when Israel's in exile, right? Where they're nobodies. They have no power. And the prophet writes, "A shoot shall come from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. His delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor and decide with equity for the meek and of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt around his waist, and faithfulness the belt around his loins. The wolf shall lie down with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the kid, the calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them."
So we look at these Old Testament passages, we'll call them Old Testament passages, and we really don't know exactly the context in which Isaiah first wrote that. Of course, we see all of this through the eyes of the Christian faith. We see Jesus all in that because it really defines, before Jesus is here, what to expect.
But it's so contrary to what the larger culture would be saying. The larger culture would be saying, "And there shall be a mighty king who is God's own self, who will be strong and mighty and command armies and destroy
Even go back to Judas Maccabeus, about 100 years before Jesus comes. There's Maccabean revolt, and it was a time when Jews did receive a bit of political autonomy around that. And the expectation in Jesus' time is who's going to be the next one?
Yeah, who's going to be? Judas Maccabeus had probably the best nickname ever. Do you remember what his nickname was?
I don't.
The Hammer of God.
Oh, wow.
That's not bad. That's a good wrestler name right there.
The Hammer of God.
But that's what people think will fix the world. And we still fall into those traps to think that the way to get what we want is through strength or manipulation, wealth or power, which wealth equals power.
Storming the capitals and doing all of those things that we're going to turn to political violence. We're going to demand our way, and that simply is not the way of God in Jesus Christ.
No. And that often challenges people, because when you really look at who Jesus is and you really buy into the way of Jesus Christ, one, it's hard, because you have to trust that God's going to take care of you, and that you don't, and it's hard because it feels unnatural. Mm. But I would say that the problem is that it's not unnatural in God's world, in God's kingdom. It's the natural consequence of following Jesus that you're going to feel like you don't fit in this world any longer.
And the church, the more that we follow the way of Jesus, we will stand out from the world. The world will look at the church and say that they're different. They're not demanding an agenda because of their own personal agenda. They are living a life of faith, of self-giving, of self-denial in the example of Jesus Christ.
So is that your plan? Well, actually, it is.
It is the plan of Jesus, and it was as it was in Jesus' day and is still today. Not easy, but simple.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being with us. Look forward to seeing you all in worship. What do things look like at Huntersville this week?
So Rod will be preaching for us on Sunday as we lead up toward Christmas. We're on that theme of how did we get here, and we'll be looking at places in the Old Testament that we are mile markers, signposts toward that's what's going to happen when Jesus comes, and we can see Jesus, the fulfillment of Jesus, all the way through.
And at Denver, we're having our 8:15, 9, and 11 services. We have a special guest. We have a missionary from Russia, a gentleman who's planting churches in Russia, who's seeing people convert for the sake of the kingdom in Russia and the Ukraine. And he's going to come and share his experience of seeing God move and act in those places. So I look forward to having that experience. Also, there will be an Advent sermon posted on Sunday morning, just in case you can't get by without hearing a sermon from me.
Oh, my goodness, absolutely.
Yeah. So that'll be up there. I know there'll be tons of likes and watches, and it'll probably become a worldwide event. So thank you, though, for being with us, and God bless you, and have a great, great day.